would like to weigh in for a moment on the point just made that a Torah Jew does not look at a given reality and assume or somehow deduce from it that if that's how it is, then that is the way it's supposed to be. I'll give you two examples that come to mind. Before I give those examples, I will just perhaps add another sentence, and that is that if one observes a certain reality in the world, it might be a physical reality, it might be a spiritual reality. It's possible that it is that way because it's supposed to be that way. A simple example would be that if we see that all human beings walk on their feet and not on their hands, it's not at all unreasonable to assume that that is because that is the way human beings are designed to ambulate, to move about. And it's not just an arbitrary decision, it's a very rational and unavoidable conclusion. So that is how it is supposed to be. So sometimes, yes, you see certain things and you can say to yourself, that is so because that is how it is supposed to be. That's normal, that's natural, that's the order of things, that's the way Hashem made it, created it, or intended it. But when are we in a position to think otherwise? We are in a position to think otherwise when the Torah informs us otherwise. In other words, if the Torah tells us that the way things should be, or an important concept in the Torah is X, Y, or Z, and you see that people are doing something different, not acting in accordance with that concept, then you have good reason to question whether that thing that you are observing or that reality that you note, whether it in fact should be so, or perhaps this is an aberration, or this is a possible outcome, but it's not the only correct outcome. In fact, according to the Torah, apparently a different outcome might be preferable, might be more correct. One example, totally unrelated to what we were discussing here today, but something which comes up in our discussions on many topics, is the statement that I have heard many times from people: if this is what Jews are doing, or all Jews are doing, or most Jews are doing, then apparently that is how it is supposed to be. More specifically, I have heard the claim, and I imagine many of you have heard this claim, that if the Jewish people accepted the Shulchan Aruch, for example, as an halachic code, then that proves that it's supposed to be so. The reason to imagine that it might not be so is, first, by historical and rational analysis of how such a reality came into being, and B, based on the Torah concept that that the seal of Hashem's will and desired methodology in the world is to strive for truth and not just accept something because that's what someone else says or other people assume to be the case. Another example, again, totally unrelated, is a claim that I've heard on a number of occasions, that if the Muslims are currently in charge of Har HaBayit, or the Temple Mount, this indicates that this is what Hashem wants at this point in time. Now that might have been a reasonable conclusion, were it not for the fact that the Torah tells us explicitly that's not what Hashem has in mind. And one could just as easily reach the opposite conclusion, that reality is so because we allow it to be so. In other words, because we are not doing what we are supposed to be doing. So therefore, others will do what they wish to do. In other words, there's no vacuum in the world. If you do not do something, or you don't lay claim to something, or you do not accept a certain responsibility, then other people will step in and do whatever it is that they wish to do. Both of those explanations are at least equally feasible, but when you add into the equation the fact that Torah just explicitly states what should be on Har HaBayit and what should not be, then you know which of those possible interpretations is the correct one. I hope that the connection between the things I just mentioned and the theme of this shiur will be apparent. That when we see certain things in the world, a Torah Jew and Eved Hashem has to view that thing before reaching any conclusion through a Torah lens. There may be a number of hypothetical possibilities, but if the Torah leads you in a particular direction, you are supposed to be viewing that reality through that particular lens, and not assume other things which contradict the thrust of the Torah.
I completely agree with Rabbi Bar-Hayim on this point, and I would add that this is something that I will try also to reference more in what I guess will be the second half of this discussion, which is that there's an additional element that has to do with iteration and the evolution of a state of affairs over time. Because none of this is actually static. It's not about a single binary decision of what is desirable for HaKadosh Baruch Hu or undesirable for him, judged once and for all, but actually it has to do with the actions of people on earth. It has to do with particularly the actions of Am Yisrael, meaning there was clearly a time at the moment of the destruction of either the first or second temple where it was not the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu for those who wanted there to be a Judaic sacrificial cult on Har HaBayit. It was not possible for those people to succeed because HaKadosh Baruch Hu at that time had set his will against that. And the proof was in the pudding, that at that moment, presumably, no matter how much one tried, one was not going to succeed. And in Sefer Yirmiyahu, there are conflicts between Yirmiyahu, whom we view as the true Navi with the authentic message, who was saying at the time that we can't overcome the rule of Bavel, and others who were saying, no, of course we can. And the ones who had at the time what seemed like a more optimistic message turned out to be wrong, and the rebellion against Bavel may have speeded the destruction of the temple. But in the present moment, if one does nothing to assay how possible it is for Am Yisrael to lay claim to their duty and their heritage in such a context, we have no ability, so to speak, to get feedback. So empirically and a priori, you could say, we could find out that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would still answer, so to speak, not now, or it needs to wait in some way, or what have you. But no one who is completely unwilling to explore the possibility and so to speak, do experiments and get feedback, can claim they know that to be the case. So I think the iterative idea, the idea that, and in general, this it doesn't have to be a national question. It can be a question of individual struggling as well. You find out what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, not by doing sort of one test and encountering difficulty and saying he's opposed, or encountering ease and saying he's in favor. You walk the path and you go more than one round, and you learn from each of those experiences. And in the fullness of time, there's an opportunity to get an unmistakable message.
As Chazal say, Yorata umasata ta'amin. If a person strives repeatedly and succeeds, then that is the best proof that is what he was supposed to do. He had to strive, and he had to try repeatedly, not give up. The first sign of difficulty or failure, if we give up, we can never say this proves that Hashem was really not for this in the first place.
I was thinking of something else, which is that the default position when he would say Breirat Mechdal should be to assume we have to do what we have to do in terms of the mitzvot. As far as Yirmiyahu, so that was the case of a prophet telling us, well, here's whatever the Breirat Mechdal might ordinarily be. Well, that's not going to be the default position right now. But right now, there is no Yirmiyahu telling us, no, the default position is not the correct position, and therefore we have to assume that the default position is the correct position.
Exactly so, precisely so. That is the purpose of Nevuah, generally speaking, or at least one of the major functions of Nevuah, to instruct us and direct us either with regards to what needs to be done, with regards to something which is not explicitly discussed in the Torah. So in a given situation, we might not know exactly what we should do. The halakha doesn't provide us with a set of instructions as a particular situation, and it's legitimate to be unsure of how to proceed. That is exactly where we need a Navi to tell us the correct path now is A, and not anything else that you may have come up with. This is what Hashem wants you to do. If it was plain and obvious from the Torah, you wouldn't need the Navi to tell you this, because the Torah already discusses it. The Torah Shebichtav, Torah Sheba'al Peh, you would have at least a general idea what to do. But if in a given situation, and there are such situations, both on an individual's life and the nation, the life of the nation, you need a Navi to point you in the right direction. And conversely, as we just discussed now with regards to the Mikdash, normally there is a mitzvah of Osoli Mikdash, to build a Mikdash, to have a Mikdash, to strive for that, to fulfill that mitzvah. But if a Navi at a particular point in time tells you right now, this thing is on hold, Hashem has decided it's not going to happen in the foreseeable future, that is a particular prophetic injunction which overrides the general default mode. In other words, following what the Torah tells us to do normally. That's the default position. In particular situations, the Nevuah overrides that. That's why a Navi can tell Am Yisrael, right now you're allowed to transgress the Torah on a temporary basis in this particular matter, or you have to go and do something unusual that normally you wouldn't do. That's precisely what Nevuah is for.
I would also add that the midah of Avraham Avinu that is widely celebrated as perhaps the most fundamentally Judaic characteristic is a willingness to have not only a dialogue with HaKadosh Baruch Hu about what should happen but even an argument. And we see that in the context of Stom and Amorah in Sefer Bereshit, and one must say Kal V'chomer. How much more so is it the case that if one's attitude examining the Torah is this seems to be what is commanded, then even if a certain amount of evidence from the events of the world could be piled up saying perhaps HaKadosh Baruch Hu is pushing back against this, the job of the Avodah Hashem presumably is to, so to speak, try to convince HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to do so through action and through tefillah and through examination of one's kavanah. And it might eventually be the case that it becomes clear that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not saying yes at a particular moment, but one certainly can't reach that moment of relenting where perhaps the Navi steps in and explains the difficulty in the manner just described, if one doesn't try. And the default position should be to be trying to convince Hashem to help you to do that which you think He has commanded you to do.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.